How's everybody doing? In analytics, people love to overcomplicate things, and your mobile game or online business could be spending months or even years trying to estimate the average life cycle for your monetizers, meaning when someone makes a first purchase with your online business, how long do you have them for until they make their last and final purchase? Well, today I'm going to show you a super simple technique that you can apply to your own business setting within 5 minutes, with the only requirement being revenue transaction data. So before we go to MySQL, let me just explain this analysis behind me. It's a lot easier than you think. So what we did is we pulled revenue for the last 7 days. So the date of this recording is January 23rd, 2025. We have our data through prior day, which is January 22nd, 2025. And we're just pulling revenue for the last 7 days. So from January 16, 2025 through January 22nd, 2025. And you can see those values here on the x-axis. Now, regarding the interpretation of this chart, what we can do is just pick one date, January 19, 2025. And what you can see is we have revenue stacked to 100%, segmented by the first purchase month. So the way you read this is on January 19, 2025, almost 80% of our revenue for this date, January 19, 2025, came from monetizers who made their first purchase sometime in January 2025. And then you can go further and say, okay, that also means that about 10% of revenue from January 19, 2025 came from monetizers that made their first purchase sometime in December of 2024, so a month ago. And then going even further, you can say 10% of revenue from January 19, 2025 came from monetizers who made their first purchase in November of 2024. So this is super useful because you can indirectly use this information to infer what the average monetizer lifecycle is for your mobile game or online business. And with this demo online business, you can kind of infer that the average monetizer lifecycle is about 30 days, right? Stretching between 30 to 90 days. So November, December, January. So most of this business's daily revenue is coming from monetizers who have made a first purchase within the last trailing 90 days, most of it happening in the most recent trailing 30-day period. So this is a very simple and straightforward and easy to implement technique to get a broad approximation or estimate on how long your average monetizer lifecycle is. And through this data and through this inference, we know that it's about 30 days, stretching out to maybe 90 days. So revenue for any given day in January of 2025 is coming from monetizers who made their first purchase sometime in that very same month, January, the prior month, December 2024, and lastly, the month before that, which is November 2024. So let's go over to MySQL and I'll show you how to do this. It's super fast, really direct, and again, can be applied to your business setting almost instantly. All you need to have is just revenue data. Okay, so here we are in MySQL, and we're just going to use a basic revenue transaction table. We've got the customer ID, the purchase date time, and then the transaction amount or purchase amount value. So that would also be revenue. Okay, so very simply, what we're going to do is bring in the customer ID, bring in the purchase date, bring in the purchase date time, and then the purchase amount. Now, the very first thing we need to do is we need to calculate the very first purchase date to get the first purchase month for each of these monetizers. So what we're going to do is say, we'll do a min, and this will be a window function. We'll do a min on the purchase date, and we'll do it or partition it by customer ID. And we'll just call this first purchase date. And let's run a few records here. Okay, great. So we added that additional column, the first purchase date for each of these customers. Fantastic. So let's just wrap this in a subselect. We will call this first purchases. And then here's what we're going to do. We really only need to visualize our data by the last 7 days of revenue. Again, the date of this recording is January 23rd, and our date that our data is through is prior day. So yesterday, January 22nd, 2025. So what we want to do is bring in the last 7 days of data or revenue data, and that's going to be for dates between January 16th through January 22nd, 2025. And then additionally, what we also want to bring in is the first purchase month for the monetizers that were contributing revenue on those days in January, or those trailing 7 days of revenue data that we're looking at. Okay, so given that, what we're going to do is say we want to dimensionalize our data by two things. We want to do it by the first purchase date, but we want to change the formatting so that this is the first of the month, right? We can rename this to first purchase month. And then we just want to keep this purchase date, right? So this will be a date ranging from January 16th, 2025 to January 22nd, 2025. And then this will be the first of the month. So it'll be like November 1st, 2024, December 1st, 2024, January 1st, 2025, depending on when this monetizer made their very first purchase. Okay, doing great. Now, the next thing we need to do is just sum revenue, right? We want an aggregation of revenue, because with that revenue, we're going to build a 100% stacked chart. Just call this revenue. That makes sense. And now one last thing we want to do is just pull revenue data for the last 7 days. So we're going to go purchase date has to be greater than or equal to the current date. Date add, interval minus 7 days, right? So this is going to take the current date, subtract 7 days, and ensure that our purchase dates are greater than or equal to 7 days ago, so that we pull the last 7 days. Okay, let's put a semicolon here. And I believe we're ready, except for, ignore me, I need to add a group by. Okay. And then delete this alias here. Okay, now we're ready. Okay, so here's our final query. Let's go ahead and run it. And the only additional recommendation I would make is to take these revenue values and just round it to the nearest whole number. So let's just do that. Okay, great. That's a lot cleaner. Okay, fantastic. So now that we have our data, let's go ahead and move it over to Excel to analyze it. Okay, so here we are in Excel, and we don't need to do anything major except for transpose this data just a little bit in a pivot table. So go ahead and select all your data, go to pivot, and put the purchase date here on the rows, and then the purchase month across the top on the columns. Remove the years, the quarters, and the months. Remove this blank down here. Go to design and remove the grand totals, and then do a summation of revenue. Go to insert, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to right click to change chart type, and then reselect the 100% stacked area and do it for every one of these series. And by series, I mean first purchase month. All right, awesome. You should get something like this. Fantastic. Let's expand the font size on the values for X and Y axis. And also for our legend. And let's change these colors to be black so that they're easier to see. All right, great. So let me walk through exactly what we did. We decided, hey, let's look at revenue for the last 7 days. Again, the date of this recording is January 23rd, 2025. We have data through yesterday, so January 22nd, 2025. And we're pulling the last 7 days of revenue data. So that's going to be stretching from January 16th, 2025 to January 22nd, 2025. And what we're essentially asking is, of all the revenue that was made on January 18, 2025, what percentage of it came from monetizers who made their very first purchase sometime in January, right? So between January 1st and January 18, 2025. And it's a pretty large number. It's like 60%. And then we can further explore where the rest of the revenue from January 18, 2025 was coming from. And you can see that about 10% came from monetizers who made their first purchase in December of 2024. And then another 10% came from monetizers who purchased in November of 2024. And then 5% or fewer came from monetizers who made their first purchase in September of 2024 and in October of 2024. But the important thing here is when we take this information and synthesize it, we can basically deduce that the average life cycle for this demo business is between 30 and 90 days. That's the average life cycle for monetizers for this sample business. And again, you can infer that because you're seeing revenue for example, January 19, 2025, and you see that most of it is coming from monetizers who made their very first purchase in this very same month. And yes, we have, 20% of those same monetizers contributing revenue on January 19, 2025, making their first purchase in December and November of 2024. But if you take it collectively, you can get a broad yet actionable understanding on what the average life cycle is for your monetizers using this very simple methodology. Anyway, I hope this helped. Have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you very much.